I am going to call this meeting to order. Stand for the pledge. Mark, would you lead us in the pledge today?
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sure, I would, Sue.
I had to get your attention somehow. Wow, it seems like the volume on this is really loud. Maybe it's because I cleaned my ears today or something. Anyway, thank you to everybody who is here. We have a small group today, but we do have a quorum. So we can move on. I'm excited for our meeting today because we have a lot of interesting things on our agenda. We have the systems of support, and we have a guest speaker that I was lucky enough to hear last night. So I'm very pleased to get us started. So work study topic. Micah, are you leading off? Or?
I will lead off.
Okay.
And I'm going to lead off by handing off to Sarah Cole and Matt Jensen. Sarah has taken the initiative and leadership role for our district in addressing what we refer to as SOS, or systems of support. And what you're going to see tonight in the presentation is this is one of the board priorities that we have mutually agreed upon as being important in the work that we do. And you can go ahead and pull that up, Callie. And so we wanted to share a little bit of information. Last May, Sarah presented some information regarding the work that we do around this. And I think one of the key points of this is the word systems. There are so many things that fall into this category and that are under this umbrella in the work that we do with students and staff, and everything from behavioral support to academic support to mental health. All of those things fit into that umbrella. And part of what we're going to talk about today is a little bit of what we do, but then some things that we're continuing to do, or new things that are going to be coming into place. And at the end of the presentation, we're actually going to invite Dr. Pullen to speak to the board. Some of you were able to attend his session last night. He worked with about 55 administrators from across Northwest Montana this morning for an 1.5-hour session, and then spent 4 hours with counselors, school psychs, mental health professionals in our school systems. Again, a group of about 80 people from across Northwest Montana. So we're very grateful that he's come and been a part of our community. I've got to spend a lot of time with him over the last 2.5 days, and we have him for one more day tomorrow. So, and he'll be working with our entire staff as well as a community stakeholder group. So I'm going to hand it over to Sarah and Matt.
Thank you. It's been a long week so far. I've had the pleasure of following Micah and Casey and Dr. Poland around, visiting different groups of people, and then just trying to do normal work. So I'm going to try to get my energy level up for you guys, but if I'm a little, it's just been an awesome week, but also a really heavy last couple of weeks. So excited to be presenting on systems of support. We could probably take every session of every board meeting to talk about all the things that fit under this umbrella. We're going to focus in on a few key things today so that Dr. Pond has time to chat with you all, and we're also going to ask you to participate in a quick activity with us and Dr. Pond. So lean into your discomfort. I'm giving you a heads up in advance in case that's exactly for you. As far as our goals, like I have been so appreciative that as a board, you've seen the value in systems of support, not only for students, but also for our staff. And so anytime I'm presenting in front of our school community, the slide's always up there. And I'm always letting them know, like, we're not just doing this because we're doing this because it's important to our school board, it's important to our community. Just as we presented last time, this is goal area 2, systems of support, and I love that there has been embedded intended outcomes. so at the end of this work, and when we start looking at, I shouldn't say the end, it's always evolving, but when we look towards our strategic plan, that there's actual things that we're looking for to make sure that our work is progressing and to ensure that our work is sustainable. So just as a recap, I know I've probably shared this pyramid a million times, but what is systems of support? And so just in a nutshell, you'll often see this pyramid, and at tier one, we're always looking at things that are best practices for all kids. All kids should be exposed to this, whether it's on the academic side of the pyramid or the behavioral, social, emotional side. The targeted interventions, again, academic or social, emotional, behavioral, are at that tier two. So it's a small group of students who get access to tier one, but still need some additional help. And then at a tier three level, it's kids who really need that individualized attention, whether it's an individualized academic intervention, or maybe it's one-on-one therapy, right? Like it's one-on-one social, emotional, behavioral work at that highest tier. Yeah?
Kelly, can you go back? So when we talk about what this looks like, especially in elementary schools and middle schools, it's important to get the idea of this encompasses 100% of our students. When we're trying to bring in a new reading program or a new program, all kids would receive the tier one. Some kids would receive the tier two. Very few kids would receive. All kids fall under those programs of support. Then I told Sarah that I was going to talk 5% of the time. She was going to talk 95% of the time, or 90% of the time, then 5% was going to be dead air. And then when we're talking about bringing programs into schools, and I still don't know all of the great programs we have. That's what I'm getting. I know the process. When you bring in new curriculums, if we're looking at the academic side, when you bring in a new curriculum, you have teachers that have experience, have different teaching that content very with it, different curriculums. So there's a natural transition process. How that transition process looks like is you start by exploring it. This is what we're doing new. Nobody's done it before, so it's new to everybody, but this is what we've committed to. We're exploring this new program. Then as you get more familiar with it, you start implementing it. Everybody's doing it. And then when you get to sustaining really means that every staff member has been trained and every staff member has bought into that curriculum or that process. It's pretty easy on the academic side. You still run into resistors because people have taught something a different way and they've become familiar or they reach sustaining with an old program. But generally speaking, I think schools are pretty good at facilitating that change process through academic issues. What Sarah and I have good conversations about is everything on the right-hand side. We talk about behavior initiatives. So you have a program, a behavior program that you're going to explore, and then getting all of the stakeholders involved, bringing out training, and then getting to sustaining.
Just to what Matt said, and on the previous slide, I love the pyramids that are blurry, because we have kids coming in and out. They're really fluid. So I sometimes even hate the tiered language. It's like, that's a tier 3 student. No, we're all tier 1. We're all kids to everything, and then some kids need a little bit more, and we flow in and out of those. The other thing I would mention is, if this list were exhaustive, like we have, like I'm looking out at, is Michelle here? My high school friend, we weren't trying to not include middle school and high school, but if we were to list all of the things we're doing at all tiers, again, it would take up several slides in PowerPoint. So we try to focus in on just examples. This is not all we're doing, but some of what we're doing. And so our focus of systems of support, the committee work this year, is really on the social emotional learning and the behavioral side. And so I just wanted to hone in on a few. At the elementary level, our principals would say all teachers know zones of regulation language. It's at all tiers, so kids understand how to, they're finding ways to express their feelings. we're sustaining check-in, check-out at the elementary level. That's a tier 2, tier 3 intervention where there's an adult checking in with a student on a consistent basis, working on very specific goals. Implementing phase of the social emotional morning meetings. Some schools, like, I won't even say, but some of our elementary schools have morning meetings with every child in every single classroom every day. Other schools are really at the exploring phase. Like, this teacher's excited about what she's learning about it, she's getting trained, and she's going to give it a try. Same with restorative practices. We've got some schools, I would say K through 12, we've got some schools in some classrooms who are really comfortable running circles. We've got some principals who feel really comfortable creating situations for kids to mediate and repair through a restorative process. And so today's focus is really going to be on what we're exploring to kind of just add to this. So it's never taking away. It's like, what can we add that's really going to enhance the work that we're doing? And what's going to help that work is Montana released social emotional learning competencies. I shared a draft with you at a previous meeting, but they've actually been finalized, they've been released, and it's going to really anchor our work. So Kelly, if you wouldn't mind just shifting to that tab really quick. So this is linked for you guys. We'll definitely not go through it tonight, but what I thought was so interesting is a couple things. One, the second to first column, or the second column over, is what adults will do. And there's been like decades of research on social emotional learning in schools. What they're finding is the only way it will stick is if educators are working on these competencies alongside the kids. Which I think is pretty awesome. The other thing that I'll point out is, I was part of this workforce, and let's just look at self-awareness, the very first one. This is grade banded, so this is kindergarten through second grade. With FADed support, our kiddos will be able to identify and label basic emotions and identify situations that cause these emotions. I can tell you there are nights where I'm operating right there. There are nights where I'm frazzled and someone says, "How are you?" and I can barely get past mad. So these are things that, again, it's important for us to work on, because if I'm still working on being aware of my own feelings, our kids are definitely going to struggle with it, right? But if I'm modeling that practice of being self-aware, our kids are going to do better and better. I think we can go back to the previous. Anything else you wanted to hit on this? Awesome. So what is social emotional learning? Like, this is a big piece, and so you saw those competencies up there. And OPI really looked to an organization called CASEL, the Collaborative for Social Emotional Learning, probably one of the leading organizations in social emotional learning. Some of their board members are professors at Yale who have coined emotional intelligence. I mean, it's just an awesome, awesome place to get the very best. And they've described social emotional learning as written here, and in 5 competency areas. And OPI just took those competencies. They didn't change them up. They said, this is best. This is the best of the best. We're going to take it. So self-awareness, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making, and self-management. So all those great banded skills fall into one of these areas. The piece that I love here that's bolded is the word skills. Like, a lot of these things our kids are not born with. They're not innate. We're not born with them. Learning how to be empathetic is not something that comes with you at birth. And if it hasn't been modeled for you and named for you, you don't always have it. So I love that. There's skills, just like academic skills that we learn. The other piece that's really important is you'll see that it's not just in classrooms and schools, but it's families and caregivers and community. So like the work we're doing right now with Dr. Poland and Nate Shute Foundation, we can't teach social emotional learning in isolation. Like, it's something that we're all working on for our kids. The next slide really gets at why social emotional learning. Some people might say, like, that's boo-boo. Kids are in school to be learning academics. Like, why would we be focusing on this? Decades of research has shown that cell interventions, when social emotional learning is integrated into the core of what we do, kids' academic performance increases. and on average by 11 percentile points. And if you think about a standardized assessment, 11 percentile points is pretty significant. If we saw our kids making 11 percentile point gains on SBAC and all the other measures, we would be thrilled. That rate of growth is amazing. Those numbers increase when adults practice social emotional learning. So it's exciting work.
If you talk to any educator, you would find them all saying that you can't address the academics before you have basic classroom management skills. And also connecting and dealing with the additional issues that are going on. So the idea of it's nice, it's like this thing we should be doing or can be doing, it's essential that we're doing this if we're focused on making student academic.
I think we're ready for the next slide. Do you want me to start this one off? Or you want to? Awesome. So one of the things that we're exploring is student support groups and small groups. And one of my first meetings with Matt, he's like, oh, I'm really excited about this program. This will be really cool. And
I tell this story. So, one of my first meetings in the district, I met with Jen Stein, and she's the principal at Edgerton. And Edgerton's a big elementary school. They currently have one counselor at that school, and so the counselor is stretched pretty thin by dealing with all the levels of support. And so we were brainstorming at lunch one day, and I said, hey, I've had some success with this program before, that's a support group for students, and it helps a school prioritize tier 1 and tier 2 through other means besides school counselors. So you can get other adults, teachers, and then you can train community members that facilitate these groups, these group work sessions, that take care of a lot of tier 1, tier 2 issues and support kids, and allows the counselor to prioritize on a lot of tier 3 activities. So Jen was game for the idea, and I said, let's pilot it. The trainers are local. They have worked with the Nate Shute Foundation in the past. Nate Shute Foundation has been very gracious to take on some of those trainings. That's how Big Fork in the past was able to implement this. So we started saying, we're going to pilot this at Edgerton Elementary School, just Edgerton Elementary School. And then Brad Holloway at Glacier said, hey, this sounds great. I'd like to make this available for our staff at the high school. I think it would fit there too. So I went to Sarah and said, hey, I've talked to 2 principals now. They're pretty excited about this. And she said, don't be, because we don't do programs here. That's what she said. So she killed the idea, or tried to. And I said, well, it's not really a program, and tried to be diplomatic as possible about the whole thing. And she read it, and now she's more excited about it than I am. So, and it's come up in conversations lately as we talk about how we address crisis situations. Part of support groups in it, and if you go back, and you don't need to, Callie, but if you visually, mentally go back, I guess, to that sustaining. If we had a culture of sustaining student support groups, you could quickly implement a crisis response. Meeting, one agenda, you have trained staff members that know how to pull together a small group and deal with a crisis situation. We don't have that right now. We're not at sustaining. We're at exploring this idea. And Sarah's idea, in case it goes badly, we want you guys to be part and see just a snapshot of what it looks like to participate in a group that might clarify what it is and what it isn't. Everybody.
Before we go, I just feel like I need a chance to defend that. I think I actually think package programs can be awesome, especially when we look at like Wonders, Go Math on the academic side. What I found on the social emotional learning side as someone who used to teach social skills groups when I was a special ed teacher is that they're not always really relevant. They're not always culturally sensitive. Our kids are like, what are you reading to me? And so what I realized was what Matt brought forth was really just a way to facilitate a conversation with young people and really just listen. It wasn't a package scripted program. And so you can see up here, what are these groups all about? I think it's important to note that a support group is not therapy. It's not like an AA meeting. It's not a therapy meeting. It's really, when we say tier 1, it's like there are these low-level issues that kids are dealing with on Snapchat all by themselves. why should they be doing this all by themselves? And we can bring them together and help them have this conversation in a healthy way. So I just threw that up there, because I think it's important that, I acknowledge that, it's not a packaged program. It's a framework, and it completely aligns with morning meetings that we're doing at the elementary. I thought it was a restorative practice discussion. When I got there, I'm like, oh, we're in a circle? Like, this is my jam, I'm up for this. So it's good stuff, it aligns with the work we're already doing. And if you go to the next slide, Matt and I will invite you to participate. So a couple things, you don't need to click on it now, Callie, but the lesson that we're going to be using is actually linked to the small group experience piece. And the other thing that we are doing, that we've been doing in the academic world for decades, is we're anchoring our work to standards, to competencies. So you'll see our focus for our group tonight is really around self-awareness and social awareness. And so I think for teachers, that's important. Like, what are we doing? What is anchoring our work? Is this based on anything? And so wanted to just highlight that it's based on the competencies. So if you will, sometimes making a circle is harder than you think. If you would bring your chair to the middle, and I invite you to make a circle, you can pass, unless you're Scott. And I'm going to invite Dr. Coleman to join us.
Are we going?
Yes, you're going.
Mini circle.
Scott, why don't you
We'll go.
come my chair over for me?
Sure, Diane.
Perfect, thank you.
I really like one. Sometimes they're oval, sometimes.
Male, female.
Right, you ready? So, I'm gonna be reading natural papers. There are times where, I say that to the students, I have all the answers, and so sometimes I have to look at my notes to make sure we're all. So, it's gonna be an abridged version. When we visited with Dr. Poland, we were privileged to be part of that. Over and over again, kids. To be able to just talk about. I would always start by, to begin, please close the circle, clear your laps, and turn off your cell. Other purpose, so our purpose today is to provide a safe space to share your thoughts and concerns, learn healthy communication skills, learn to treat ourselves and others. We are responsible for our own lives and based on our choices. Guidelines. It's confidentiality. What is said in group stays in group, and this is really, really important. So don't look at your soul tonight. But what you find, like I just left a step. One is everyone speaks for him or herself. Everyone has the right to pass and share their own comfort. Come and join us. Yeah. Jackie, not having a pass, but there's a good personality if you want to.
So let's,
Take a chair.
while Jack's getting settled, if we back up to the beginning, what you're seeing today is session 2 of 8 sessions. So each session is an hour. People can put it in their map. High school schedule, you would probably schedule it for. This one is pulled out of a feeling, a myriad of different. Healthy relationships. The boundaries and then kids that show up that either about that themselves, or they want to go to support plan. All groups don't have the same prompt. All groups follow the same script. Great.
Thank you. No,
Yeah.
so Matt and I will interject. So we'll go from like facilitator roles, telling you about this process, and then jumping into it. So when Jackie walked in, like, I walked in late today to the training. It's that's what you're doing.
Not to be late.
We don't say that in staff group. So Jack, we just went over purpose and then some guidelines. So confidentiality with 7 group, saving group, for herself, who has the right to pass. I'm gonna start, listen as they read through a list of basics. Sad, angry, scared, hurt. Identify what you are feeling. One of the feelings that are red or another feeling that comes to mind. Get a note if I'm in to share, or usually we'll say what direction. Know where it's coming, and then I ask. I'll go ahead and model it first. And Is there anyone willing to start? Scott, are we gonna go to Diane or just one word?
I hate these things.
They're hard.
I don't like groups.
They're hard. Yeah.
I'm pretty calm, and I love these things. But when I had to identify, it was difficult. I'm just saying, anxious. A lot of pressure on me this week.
I'm gonna say anxious.
Anxious is a part of my life. I was thinking,
You can say any words you like.
it would happen.
First word was and then clear.
Up to the tissue. it starts to get need to know a group is feeling, and I think when kids, for example, many times go, Michael will get vulnerable, and that gives me free. I thought it was really tough, so I felt worse. Sorry. I may even just, because you said that, I actually may jump to kind of a lower level. So what we do in groups sometimes is we start real low level, so that it's not like, you don't want people feeling they need to clear their soul. So I actually am going to jump. That was just, in this lesson, we would have worked through 4 different emotions. And we turn to talk is because even in this group, for some people, that was really comfortable. If they're an 8-week group, sometimes it's not so. And then they'll say, can I have a. It takes some. So what we would do is, I would say, partner you do not know well and sit facing each other. Close your eyes and think of a time in the past when you felt, and we work through 4 different emotions. Lighten the mood. I'm going to just choose happy. So what we're going to do is happy partners. And here's what we're going to do. You ready? You're going to close your eyes and think of a time in the past when you felt happy. How old were you? Who was there? Where were you? What happened? And then you're each going to take 2 minutes to share. So share with me for 2 minutes, and I wouldn't ask to add my 2 cents in. I'm just going to listen. And we're going to flip. And I'm going to do 2 links because we're doing it. Okay. I'm going to grab the phone.
You know how I love this stuff, so I'll go first and you'll pass.
I'll defer my 2 minutes.
All right. Partner 1, go ahead.
You want to get over one?
College of Montana. And then 46 million years to 35 million years. And it's over thrust belt, along the middle course of the life. And that formation of after finding out about
And I was looking way
found this obscure article.
I guess,
The poet
he
he wrote it back long ago. And then I
He got his
read
job.
about it. So many interests.
I was going
Everyone could
my job is doing
possible insight, which is really rare. Because they're soft spot.
So we just fun.
And just one basically almost
Target practice.
predators eat them.
We go skinny dipping in one of the little ponds.
There's a soft spot bacteria. So
I
anyway,
really,
so found out about that. And then I went on Google, found where this guy was. And then went on a hike. I drove her down there. We didn't quite get to the spot. I was kind of running on time because I was football game for a while, so. But I located the site on Google and verified it.
we drove to Colorado.
Oh, you can get to it by foot. factors get careful, it's about, now, you just gotta go with
Time with my dad.
that is
How dependent my mom.
how far,
Played with
west and,
All right, you guys, if you haven't done so already, if you can transition to the next person.
because it's
early off of the side of the mountains because of gone there. I went down, there was no sign of air. Fishing was great too, so something to fall back on, big hole.
how I like to always open sessions on the road.
I used to have been
Because everybody
travel down, wade and
arms around shoulders, right foot in.
no Kelly man.
And then your dad.
Tim and Jimmy both there.
Summarize.
We ended up. So we got stopped. And waiting for traffic. Trying to get one. Ended up one car behind us. Ended up in
Squeeze in everybody.
They transformed it into the top of the words. And then walking to the restaurant.
It was really great. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Some kids that were
Man, I get it.
not academic.
That sounds like
Together with them. Values. Maybe back campus learning.
he gets future credit.
More embrace in the kids. Regardless of who you have.
All right, you guys, if you want to finish up and turn back towards the circle.
I get to watch football with Chris Campbell and that was fun.
No, you weren't.
I didn't win it.
All right, so just a couple process questions. This is non-sequential, not everyone has to share, just if you have something. How did it feel to share your feelings? Even happy ones.
Happy, feeling made you feel.
I share experiences all the time. People why get all hopped up on things and I just shared found a fossil site that I recently heard about and did some research. There was. But it was cool. It was really
How did it feel to hear?
I feel like I learned more. I liked it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
good to do listening.
Yes, yeah. But
Wow. Wonderful things happen. The amount that we share. So I'm gonna, change the closure, but there's always like a check-in, warm-up, and a closure. To where it goes. Before you take.
Well, I'd like you all to think about maybe some words that summarizes the activity. Some of those words, and then we'll pick who has a word that describes the time we just spent together. Trust, okay. Other words that come to mind. They're all good words. And which one of those words do you want to pick? Trust, challenge, breathe?
Trust.
And with groups of students, we always do a little activity and we all shout whatever word we all agreed on and talk about really what can you carry with you. And I think it'd be especially administrators and trust. Everyone has part in all working together for all the common goals. So I think that's really a wonderful.
And pass the baton, look at the castle. Be able to bring community together. We'll move our chairs back and then maybe get Dr. Paul in the discussion.
I'll do that.
Thank you, guys.
I appreciate you doing it. I just had meniscus surgery,
I'll take it back.
so I really appreciate that. I'm supposed to still be wearing a brace.
If it was your child, yeah, if it was your kid, they'd still be wearing a brace. Yeah. But if it was your child, they would still be wearing a brace. I just wanted to make that point. Really quick, as you guys are getting seated, since we didn't really represent high school, if you're okay with it, Michelle just had a great connection that she's like to make.
Thank you. Our counseling team actually probably 6 or 7 years ago went to Big Fork and got trained and learned from your team. And so we've been blessed to be able to do student groups for a number of years. And those would be, you know, the kids would be selected, there was a multi-week session, and you always knew when it was student group day, because when you went into the main office conference room, there was a circle of chairs there. And I just wanted to point out that, one of the unfortunate effects of the pandemic has been the loss of those student groups. So it has been almost 2 years now that we have not been able to run student support groups in our school. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're in the situation we're in with our suicides in our schools. We, you know, our kids have just, I kind of envision it as our kids have been just sort of floating away from us, right? That our student support groups was just one of the ways we were able to kind of wrap around them and circle them back in. And we've lost ground because of the pandemic and a lot of the supports that we used to be able to do. So we're really looking forward to hosting our student groups once again. It's exciting that more schools are going to take this on because it's just been a nice little component of our systems of support. So, thank you.
I feel like there's like 1,000 things to say, just to try to put some parameters on what you guys experienced, but I won't say all of them, but a couple points. The training to be able to facilitate a group, you have to go through a group. So it takes about twice as long. It looks a lot like what Sarah presented, so you participate in the group and then you pause and say, we do this because, and then you explain why you do it. Through that process of training to facilitate groups, inevitably there's people that are uncomfortable and they say, this is not for me. And so there's a natural weeding out of people that just go, this is what I have in mind. And then you also get to the end of the group and you trainer recognizes that some people just aren't the best facilitators. So they won't recommend them to be facilitators. And when we run groups with students, it's all voluntary. And so students can choose to be in a group or choose not to be in a group. and then they can choose to pass or not. And usually the first several weeks of the facilitator group, it is a little bit awkward, and especially when you have a mix of kids from different groups. They don't have natural connections to each other, but then over the course of time, they do get more comfortable and they do settle in. And what you experience in 10 minutes, imagine that for an hour and then stretched over 3 weeks, you'd be much more comfortable sharing, deeper level emotion stuff. When those higher level emotions come up, and it was in the script, or when conversations come up about abuse or threat of harm to self or others, those things we have to report. And so in the facilitator script, we say that to kids. And then we protect those kids in those situations when they share, close the group down, and then we get those kids to the support. And that would be the tier 3 type situation, and they get into support from a counselor. So what you saw was a really brief snapshot of us, and I thought Sarah did a great job of saying this is what group looks like, and then pausing and saying facilitated. But I wanted to clarify a couple of those points. Thank you.
Were there any questions?
Sarah, could you explain the question that I had asked you earlier, the difference between the standards and the competencies?
Sure. So, really, OPI went with competencies instead of standards. Standards are a little bit more rigid. There's things where there's typically a ceiling, like kids excuse this. Social emotional learning competencies are things that ebb and flow and evolve. And so they're more flexible, I would say, than standards. So that was intentional.
All right, and it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Scott Poland. We've spent quite a bit of time with Dr. Poland, and before he comes up, I also want to acknowledge some other people in groups in our community. One is Casey Howard, who's in the audience tonight, who is the Executive Director of the Nate Shute Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And she was very instrumental in helping us bring Scott to Kalispell to address our suicide cluster. We also had great sponsorship from Parkside Credit Union, Logan Health, Glacier Bank, and just grateful for those organizations too, because this is, it's asking a lot, and for Scott to be able to kind of drop what he's doing as a college professor to come to Kalispell and work with our school district has been great. This is his, I think, 5th or 6th session. So far, he presented to our community last night. We had about 400 people in attendance at Kansas Church and another 400 online, so we had pretty good outreach there. He met with student groups from Glacier and Flathead High School. Today, he worked with administrators from across Northwest Montana. There were about 55 of us in this room today that he presented to, and then also did a 4-hour session with counselors, school sites, school mental health therapists, just a wide variety of group, again, from across Northwest Montana, from Knoxon and Troy and Polson, so has a pretty wide-reaching impact, and not just for our district. And asked him as part of this if he would be willing to come and talk to our board about his experiences. He's worked with 14 different school districts across the nation on suicide clusters. He has also responded to districts who have experienced other crises, including school shootings, most recently with the Parkland shooting in Florida, and has just been a blessing for our community so far this week. So glad to introduce Scott.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Hill, and thank all of you for the opportunity to talk with you for a few minutes today. I'd like to spend maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and then I'd really like to hear some questions from you. To be honest, I'm very impressed with everybody I've met in the Kalispell schools. I'm impressed with the caring. And please know something, you're not the only school district in this country experiencing a problem with youth suicide. I've been at this 40 years. I lost my father to suicide. Some of you might have known one of the students who died suicide. Some of you might have lost a relative or a good friend at some point. You know, I wish I could stand here and tell you every youth suicide can be prevented. They can't. The vast majority can be. And really, what's holding us back? We're all afraid to talk about it. We're all afraid if we bring it up, it might start happening. I'll show you a few statistics about Montana high school students in a moment. But I hope you carry with you tonight, we have to talk about it. We have to be comfortable asking. And we need to be able to know all the resources. You're not the first kid to feel this way. There actually is help available. And I did work full-time in schools for 26 years. 24 of those, I directed psychological services for a district of 100,000 students in Texas. I was their go-to guy after every tragedy, whether I wanted to be or not. I learned a lot about helping schools, kids, teachers, parents, after tragedies that affected young people. So I think I've pretty well covered these points, except to say, to simplify it, it takes a village. This isn't a school problem. This is a community problem. And we need mental health professionals involved, law enforcement, clergy, survivor groups, parents, school leaders, civic leaders, students themselves. We have to have all of those groups involved in working on prevention. And you probably know that Montana, sadly, for decades, has had one of the worst problems with suicide in the nation. It's always Alaska, Montana, and Wyoming. And 4 years ago, my partner is a retired principal. We wrote this for the state of Montana. It was mailed to every single principal in the state. We've subsequently done the state plans for suicide prevention. We've done 3 for Texas. We just completed 1 for Florida. We've submitted the draft for New Jersey. Just know that youth suicide is a problem all over the nation. Sadly, it's the second leading cause of death for every child over the age of 10. You know, this is the first time I ever put together this slide. These are all the communities that I personally went to after point clusters. And to be honest, there are lots of communities that had a point cluster, but they didn't want to recognize it because somebody would go, what's wrong? What's wrong with our schools? What's wrong with our community? So you're wondering, what exactly is a point cluster? Well, it's more youth suicide than we would ever expect in a short amount of time in a single geographic region. So the 7 that you've experienced is statistically, frankly, it's totally off the charts. It's something that really requires a lot of ongoing effort from all of those stakeholders that I mentioned. There are the state plans that we've worked on, and to be honest, suicide prevention is pretty much the same everywhere. Sure, Montana has some special challenges, but youth suicide prevention, the bulk of prevention, intervention, and postvention is the same everywhere. Now that I've used that word postvention, that's a series of planned activities to try to help everybody with their shock, their grief, their confusion, and yes, sometimes even guilt after the suicide of a young person. So it's planned activities with the purpose of preventing further suicide. You know, the answers died with them. We're never going to know why these young people did what they did. We could spend time tonight talking about many of the factors that are involved in youth suicide. We want to go forward. So if anybody starts talking about something they think they know about one of these young people, always put the focus on how do we move forward as a school and as a community. The answers did die with them. And I always encourage everybody not to make a sweeping conclusion based on what you think you know about one situation. we have more than 2,000 high school students that die by suicide annually. So if we're gonna make a conclusion, let's look for something that's happened hundreds or even thousands of times. What is at the root of a youth suicide? It's untreated and it's undertreated mental illness, often in combination with adverse childhood experiences. Those are all the things you don't want a kid to experience. Being rejected by a parent, living in poverty, being physically, emotionally, sexually abused, living with a mentally ill parent, living with a substance abusing parent, having lost many loved ones. Those are all factors that very much put a young person at risk. And I've already talked about. In fact, I'll just quote our Surgeon General. About 48,000 suicides a year in America. We got to talk about it more in our homes, our schools, places of worship, and the workplace, with everybody knowing what to look for and what to do. And of course, the suicide of a young person today, I think it's more challenging than ever before. And I think you know why. It's social media. It's like taking a rock and throwing it into a pond. These suicides have impacted young people all over this valley. In fact, vulnerable young people, they find each other. They're impacted by negative events. So this makes it particularly challenging. And it's why it was so wonderful that we had mental health professionals, administrators from areas much beyond Kalispell today. And if I was sitting there tonight, I'd want somebody to talk about what worked. This is from the World Health Organization. Removing lethal means. Sometimes people say, oh, but wouldn't they just find another way? No, the answer is they probably won't. There's a website at Harvard. They've summarized research from all around the world. You remove the gun, you raise the barrier on the bridge, suicide rates go down. It's that simple. And I know where I am, and I try to choose my words carefully. I would never question an adult's right to own a gun, but with that right comes a responsibility. Safeguard that gun when you have a troubled, impulsive, angry, depressed, substance abusing, mentally ill person that might reside in your very own home. About a year ago, I talked with the Missoula High School principal. She could have used any one of 30 loaded unsecured guns in her home. So I think I've made the point about we have to talk with parents about when we're telling you that your child's depressed and suicidal, please take steps to increase supervision, of course, but to make sure they do not have lethal means available to them. And then the second point there is pretty straightforward. We've already talked about adverse childhood experiences. One group, if I were to go back to those 15-point clusters that I responded to, you know what group rarely came to the table? That would be the local physicians. But here's the bottom line. 70% of the time, the individual who died by suicide, regardless of their age, they actually went to the family doctor shortly before they ended their life. I know my father did. Physicians have a tremendous opportunity. In fact, we have a national recommendation saying every teenager in the doctor's office, they should be asked questions about energy level, joy of life, depression, and thoughts of suicide. So what protects kids? All these things. You know, Micah mentioned my work in Parkland. You know what I've said over and over to Parkland parents? When a kid lives in a stable family, when they're shown that unconditional love every day, every way by their parents, they can overcome almost anything. But I think we all know not every kid is shown unconditional love. Lots of kids are in the middle every day, every way about divorces and separation. And one of the questions we asked in the group the other day, we asked about go-to trusted adults. We asked them to just think about who you would go to. And what are those qualities that make that person that comes to mind somebody you trust, an adult who you know could help you? By the way, I'm a big believer in secrets, confidence, of course, but not when somebody's talking suicide and homicide. You know, the most interesting thing is to ask kids themselves. Because you know what I really believe about most tragedies that involve a young person? Probably could have been prevented because their friends almost always knew a lot about their plans. So what do kids say? Like, why don't they go to an adult? I've been conditioned not to tell. Oh, I just didn't think it could happen. I feared retaliation. I didn't want to get involved. Or then they'll say, I'm sorry, but I just don't have one of those trusted adults. And those are all things we have to work on in terms of preventing further deaths. And places of worship, they're a wonderful place for connections. The Center for Disease Control really kind of simplified suicide prevention. We've got to work on increasing connections in our homes, our schools, and in our communities. And they also said something as simple as no one thing, no one person is ever to blame. It's almost like it's everyone's fault, and yet it's no one's fault. And my greatest hope would be the next generation of young adults in Montana, they know what to look for. They know what to do. They'd be familiar with all of the resources. They know to truly be there for another person. And talking with students, I might say something like, you might need this information next week. It might be at Montana State next year. It might be on your first job after college. It might be with an elderly neighbor. By the way, do you know who's the most at risk for suicide in America? An old white guy like me, when they might have health, family, and financial problems. Maybe they've lost a lot of people close to them. You know, it's almost as simple as everybody needs a purpose. And for an elderly widow, perhaps, maybe just getting a pet, having a dog, having a reason to get up every single morning. So purpose and meaning. And you know something about psychology that I tell all of my doctoral students? There's a lot of meaning in psychology. There's a lot of chance to feel like you're making a difference. And every one of you, by serving on the school board, you are making a difference in the lives of the young people in your community. We've already talked about the go-to adult. All right, there's the YRBS, Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance Survey for the state of Montana. High school students in the last 12 months, 10% of them said they already made a suicide attempt. The figure for this valley is actually a little higher, 12.2. But for the simple math, so what's that actually mean at Michelle's High School? About 140 kids made a suicide attempt in the last 12 months. Do you know what's really scary? We don't know who most of them are. Their parents don't know. Who knows all about it? That would be their classmates. And that's why it's so important to get kids to come forward. And the middle school data, it's a little different because they asked middle schoolers, not over the last 12 months, what about over your lifetime? But just know the middle school data is equally alarming. The most dramatic rise in suicide rates, middle school age girls. It's doubled in the last decade. So, to be honest, all of these things you're doing, it's just a matter of getting greater buy-in from the community. Training for all staff on what to do, what to look for, work as a part of a school team. I get to talk to all the general staff tomorrow. The school climate that promotes connections, caring, wellness, policies and procedures, and making sure people understand them and they follow them, documenting all the steps we take to keep kids safe, notifying parents, making a referral for community-based treatment and assessment. And if they end up going in a hospital, we've got to get information shared and have reentry meetings so we can properly support those young people when they come back from being hospitalized. And having enough school mental health professionals and having services available in the community. Very impressed when I looked at the website. What's front and center? Suicide prevention. What everybody needs to look for, what everybody needs to do. And bring parents along. Now, I was pleased we had a big crowd last night. And having done this for 40 years, sometimes the parents that really needed to hear the message, they weren't there. We've got to figure out, how do we reach more of our parents? And, you know, once we have all of these in place with well-trained staff, now we can figure out what are absolutely the best programs to talk with students about this. I want to be really clear about something. We've got to talk to students more about suicide prevention, but we should never do it in an assembly. What's the problem with an assembly? Kids aren't going to ask you a question. You're not going to get a read on how they're experiencing this information. Somebody was crying and went out the back door. You're not even sure who they were. So in a classroom, and sometimes even smaller groups, so you can really get a read on how they are experiencing this information. But I'm reminded of where I used to work. So I'm talking to ninth graders in a classroom, all the desks in a circle. And by the way, if you were there last night, simple piece of advice for adults: talk less and listen a lot more. Kids don't want you to say, do this, do that, you won't have a problem. They just want you to recognize what they're going through. They want us to listen. So a ninth grade girl raised her hand and she said, I did exactly what you're saying last year in 8th grade. I told the school counselor. He made me feel like I was some kind of a snitch. She did the right thing. And he should have been saying, thank you so much. This is what a responsible friend does. It's possible that she might be angry at you for a while, but please know you absolutely did the right thing. You might have actually saved your friend's life. So these point clusters, they're geographic. It's like that rock being thrown into a pond with the ripple effect everywhere. What research we have, and we need a lot more, would point to psychiatric disorders and lots of those problems I've already talked about that we don't want kids and families to have. This is difficult research to gather. Not too long ago, I was in Jordan, Utah. Well, the state of Utah wanted to study that cluster, but parents have to agree to participate, and sometimes they just won't. So as a result, we don't have necessarily as many answers as we would like. I can tell you, and all I can do is be honest, schools tend to underestimate the impact of suicides. It might impact classmates for as long as 2 years. And there are all these issues. The birthday the deceased would have had, the anniversary of their death, the graduation ceremony they will not be participating in. So we have to look at it simply as the community. And the entire community is really in this for the long haul. And what we do know from some of those epidemiology studies, and I think I said that word correctly, it's a tough word to say, it's right behind me. Lots of issues for GLBTQ students. family members that just didn't see the need for mental health treatment. A lot of pressure on those young people. Substance abuse problems and access to a lethal weapon. And I think I could argue pretty convincingly, this might be the single time in modern history that is the most difficult for young people. Their mental health needs may be greater than ever before. I've been in every state, and I'm only going to speak quite honestly. Schools don't have enough mental health professionals. They need more school psychologists. They need more social workers. They need more counselors. So what did Florida legislature learn as a result of the Parkland tragedy? To meet the recommended ratio, social workers need to be increased 10 times. Counselors doubled, school psychologists quadrupled. Progress towards that has been quite slow, but at least the legislature does in fact understand the shortage of mental health professionals. This slide's about the impact of a suicide. On average, 135 people are impacted. About 1/3 of them have a life-changing event. You know what actually helps us survivors? Getting involved in suicide prevention, raising awareness. We're pretty dedicated to, we don't want anybody else to lose a best friend or a relative to suicide. Risk factors. This comes directly from the Center for Disease Control. Did anybody back out of the suicide pact? That's rare, but it does happen that kids were in a pact. Did anybody have a last negative interaction with the victim? You know what 4 kids told me on a Monday morning in Houston, Texas? We told her Saturday night was the night she was supposed to die. We told her where to put the gun, pull the trigger, it'll be quick. They're going to remember that conversation for the rest of their lives. And other kids certainly didn't encourage it, but they're now going, I should have realized. She gave me a really definite clue, and I just didn't get it. But what's the most challenging thing? It's actually not the close friends that are most at risk. It's other kids with their own set of sad circumstances. Now they're really impacted because somebody actually did what they have been thinking about. Maybe they hardly knew that victim, but they know they actually did it. Maybe they, knew their locker was at the west end of the building. So lots of kids are at risk because of all the circumstances in their lives. These are important, safe messages, and we really have to figure out a way to get more of these on social media. Suicide's not fate. It's not destiny. It's not inherited. Most suicides can be prevented. Resiliency and recovery are possible. There is treatment available. And I thought maybe the most helpful thing I could do is to share with you what they did at Academy 20 in Colorado Springs. I got help, which is exactly what you're doing. Everybody got training. Everybody that interacts with students. They formed a county-wide youth suicide prevention task force. They had services available to kids over the summer because those suicides were all in late spring. Extensive training for school mental health professionals. We did that today. They implemented the Signs of Suicide program in all secondary schools. They implemented Sources of Strength at all secondary schools. They did Riding the Wave program, which does use some direct language about depression and suicide at the 5th grade level. 7 months later, they had another suicide. They mobilized quickly. The second night, I'm sitting in Fort Lauderdale. My buddy Rich is in Los Angeles. 750 parents tuned in to our Zoom meeting. To be honest, they were scared. They wanted to know what to say, what to do, and what to look for. And they created a new position. A district of about 20,000, so significantly bigger than this one, but her name's Martha. She's the wellness and suicide prevention specialist. That's her only job. And it's a very important one in today's world. I emphasize to administrators today, single greatest source of information and a guide in the aftermath of suicide is the After Suicide Toolkit for Schools. I helped write it the first time, I helped revive it the second time. Strive to treat all the deaths the same, regardless of cause of death, popularity, or socioeconomics. So I'd like you to think about creating a policy so that every school does the same thing. And again, circumstances and issues about socioeconomics and popularity should not matter. My favorite memorial, let's raise money, let's raise awareness, let's do things that are going to help the living. And here's the most complicated things, especially in rural locations like pretty much all of Montana. How do we actually get a transfer of responsibility from a school counselor or an assistant principal to a community-based professional? And I don't have any easy answers here. It's about having enough community-based professionals. It's about having funding. It's about somehow prioritizing this. I think I've pretty much mentioned all of these points, but does everybody know, if I pull out my iPhone and I've got one here somewhere, if I push the button and I tell Siri I want to kill myself, does everybody know what happens? Siri says, may I connect you with the National Crisis Helpline? Every kid needs to know that. They need to know about the crisis text line. Text any word like help to 741-741, you are immediately connected to a trained person who is texting you back. And if you would glance at this slide from Madeline Gould at Columbia, what's it really saying? There's actually no great mystery to this. Untreated and undertreated mental illness in combination with adverse childhood experiences. And this is a great challenge, but your community is not alone in facing these challenges. And you're very fortunate to have the Nate Shute Foundation here. I talked earlier today about a program started in Utah by a building principal called the Hope Squad, getting students involved. And they have advisors, and they're working on promoting hope and resiliency. I also shared that it's possible to receive what's called a Project Serve grant from the U.S. Department of Education. And my contacts at OPI indicated they would be very glad to help the district apply for one of those Project Serve grants. And there is information, of course, from OPI. And then I'd like you to just think about, could it be possible to fund maybe at least 50% of somebody's job to really promote wellness and suicide prevention? And then how might we be able to tactfully get across the message to parents about the importance of securing firearms in their homes and making sure every kid has a go-to adult? There's the website for the Suicide and Violence Prevention Office that I direct for my university. And maybe if I just took a moment to give you a positive example, because we need those while you're thinking about your questions for me. Kid's name was Tom. Tom had some problems, had a substance abuse issue. Tom had a girlfriend now. Things were going pretty well, but his substance abuse problem caused him to lose his job. And then, let's call her Cheryl. She tried to tell him, I'm not going to have a substance abusing boyfriend. she broke up with him. Tom was exhibiting a lot of those warning signs, not taking pride in appearance. He was driving recklessly. He was getting high every single day. He was making statements about death and dying. He gave away some prized possessions. Cheryl, because of a program very much like what the Nate Shute Foundation does for your district, Cheryl knew this is serious. She felt actually compelled to go open up his locker. She knew the combination. You could call it divine intervention, premonition, sheer luck. There's a goodbye note. It's addressed to her. So what's the real question here? What do kids do with that information? They often hesitate. They try to handle it themselves. Or they think, oh, if he's not better in a day or two, maybe I'll get adult help. She knew better than that. She went immediately to the counselor. Counselor went to the principal. The principal searched the building. Tom was nowhere on campus. And then he turned to Cheryl and said, you must know where he lives. You do. Turned to his assistant and said, we're going to his house. Call his dad and tell him to meet us at his home. Call Scott Poland, tell him to meet us there. And I think we arrived minutes after Tom did. He opened the door and he said, why is everybody here? The principal said, we got a lot of things to talk about. You need to invite us in. Your dad will be here soon. You know what he told me? I went home to get the gun. I was going to finish the Jim Beam and I was going to kill myself. I don't know if he would have or not, but his dad got him outpatient treatment for a while. Well, that was after the week at inpatient, but after several months, the outpatient treatment was discontinued. You're wondering, did he ever get back together with Cheryl? No, he didn't, but he thanked her. And that principal's name was Ronnie Truitt. And he was a great man. He died, and a school was named in his memory. So literally 20 years later, I go back for the reception in Mr. Truitt's honor, and I spotted Donnie Sue Johnson. That was the counselor of that day that was in the car with the principal. And I rushed up to her and I said, that kid Tom, have you ever seen him? Whatever happened to him? I remember every detail so vividly. She said, funny you would ask that, Scott. I saw him in the grocery store a few months ago. He was there with two cute little girls. He's married, he's working. Now, if he walked through that door right now, would he tell you his life's wonderful? Probably not. But he would just say, I'm glad to be alive. And who did the most in that scenario? Clearly, that was Cheryl, who didn't hesitate, who got to an adult. And everybody worked together. And I said this today to your school mental health team. Without a doubt, you've already saved lives. It's just really hard to measure saving a life. And unfortunately, a lot of emphasis gets placed on when we've actually lost students. But your school district is doing so much right. It's just a matter of hopefully getting a few more resources and getting really a commitment from the entire community and all those various stakeholders. And so thank you for the chance to talk with you, and I'll take a moment and try to answer any question that you might have. So. Yes, sir.
You mentioned post-vention, and I'm wondering of the intervention. Or is it the things that work, are they in place? That have been just that at all? What improve that part too? One, how has been identified? Best thing.
Okay.
Afterwards, so it isn't
All right, great question. The intervention, first and foremost, there needs to be what's called a written safety plan. Internally, what can you do if you ever have these thoughts again? Externally, who can you turn to? That is part of the process. And making sure these young people actually are seen by mental health professionals in the community that are skilled in suicide risk assessment and management. And it's really important that we get releases of information signed so that that practitioner, whether they be a private practitioner or somebody at the hospital, they actually persuasively talk with parents about, you know, we need to let the school know a little bit of information so they'll know what to look for and how to support this young person. By the way, can you imagine being an AP everything and you just missed 7 days of high school because you were hospitalized? If nobody tells the school anything, they're not going to be maybe as patient as they could be about making up all that work. So the information sharing is important, as well as simply having enough resources in the community. That's a challenge. It's not unusual for practitioners to basically say, I don't take any more patients, especially I don't take any more suicidal adolescent patients. But that's a challenge. And that's something that has to be worked on from a community-wide level. Any other question or comment for me? Yes, sir. It's Jack, right?
Yes. Thank you. So let's talk about the generational changes that have occurred, where you made a comment earlier that this might be the toughest generation for young people. It seems like any generation has said that, because whether you talk about the Roaring '20s, or the Depression of the '30s, or the rock and roll of the '50s, then the '60s with
now you're my generation.
Is it pre-bus? Yeah. Yeah, then you have this, so I grew up in Detroit and St. Louis in the '60s and the '70s, you know, whether it's race riots or drug warfare. Then you have the other things in the '80s and the '90s. So, and maybe suicides weren't talked about. Suicides occurred. I knew people and all those in the '60s and the '70s and the '80s and the '90s that have committed suicide. But how, and maybe it was a taboo subject back then, but how do we know what the percentages were back then compared to the percentages now to know if there's really a change in percentages?
Okay, great question. So the bottom line is we do know suicide rates for young people have tripled since the 1960s. Center for Disease Control can well document that. We also know the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance Survey has been around now for 30 years. So they know increasing numbers of suicidal thoughts, plans, and action. So definitely it has increased, and we can certainly verify that. I think one of the other things is pretty simple. When I graduated from high school, I could go to any state college in Kansas I wanted to. It was that simple. Try doing that today. Florida, you want to go to the University of Florida, like maybe your parents and grandparents? You better be in the top 8% of your class or you have no chance. So there is simply more pressure and competition on kids today than ever before. And it's well documented that suicide rates have gone up. Any other questions?
So just taking that a bit more when you talk about social competitive pressures.
Mm-hmm.
And let's talk about Japan and China. How do suicides there compared to suicides here?
Okay, so to be honest with you, we all have the impression that China would have a very high suicide rate. The suicide rate in America is higher than that in China. Would China have more deaths by suicide than we do? Yes, but only because they have a much greater population. The U.S. ranks number 12 in the suicide rate in the world. And you compare us to all the Western European countries, our suicide rate is simply much higher. It's that simple. So you're probably surprised, but our suicide rate is higher than much of Southeast Asia. I presented in China. I presented in Japan. Certainly they have concerns about suicide, but we've got a bigger problem than most of the countries in the world. Any other comment or question for me? Yes.
I really appreciate some of the simple things that you pointed out last night to us, especially as a parent, of things that we forget or we might fall short on, reminding that child every day that they are priceless and they mean the world to us. And I think we get caught up in our everyday lives and we forget to stop and take that moment, and that can make the difference in each and every one of these kids. I appreciate the things that you pointed out to the parents last night, and I know a lot of others did too.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for your time, and thank you for all your support and caring for the community, and I'm impressed with this man right over here.
Yeah.
Mr. Hill has a great heart. You're lucky to have him.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
So I got a quick question before.
Yeah.
I know he's presenting tomorrow. My guess, would we as a board have the opportunity to attend that?
Yeah, so Dr. Poland is presenting to all staff, 6th through 12th grade. And there is a remote option for it, but we are scheduled to be in the auditorium here at Planet High School. And I think as trustees, if you have the opportunity to attend and listen to the message that he would share with teachers, I think that would be very important.
What time?
1:45. Yep.
This is Rebecca Linden. Is there space for one more question?
Yes.
Thank you for coming, Dr. Poland. And is there anything besides geography that you've noticed links this particular cluster? Is there a similarity of experience or a similarity of a trigger, or is there something specific linking this group, or is it, just as it happens?
I'm sorry, but I've had a really long week. I might have missed a little bit of that. Would you mind repeating it, please?
Besides geography, is there something that links this particular cluster? Is there some similarity of experience or trigger that happened in this community, do you believe, or is this just a more general problem?
It's really a more general problem, with Montana having some special challenges because of the rural nature, because of factors like seasonal affective disorder, because of lack of resources for mental health for kids and families. Some of that is really in place all over the country, but I think Montana is particularly challenged in terms of the mental health center might be far away. I remember when I was working on the CAST-S, somebody said, we have 100 one-room schoolhouses. We can't do suicide prevention. You have to. Maybe it's a teacher. Maybe you don't have a school psychologist, but everybody realizing this is serious, parents need to be notified, and we've got to get these young people for treatment, even if it's not close to where they reside.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Poland. Any other questions? Okay, then let's move on with the agenda.
Thank you.
Next up is our monthly budget report. They're information items only. So Gwen?
So just same report that you see month after month, this is updated with new budgets, very few expenditures in July and August. Most of the revenue right now is cash reappropriated, and revenue will start to come in with taxes in November. Nothing really remarkable there. You'll see it month after month, and if you take a minute to look at it and have questions, you can email me, call me, or we can talk about it at the board meeting. So same thing on the high school side. There are questions, I did have a couple emails, so. Good. Food service report, and of course, we're down a little bit there to get started. We ended last year up $350,000, and at this point, we spoke clear to the bottom. After the first 2 months, we're down 65. We're in good shape, we're just getting things started. A lot of purchases are done at the beginning of the school year, when we're about to go full on, food service day in and day out. And we did have a couple of days where we had the highest number of students ever eat in our lunch.
Gwen, can I just mention one other thing? I had a Zoom meeting with Senator Tester and with Senator Daines, 2 separate meetings, and both of them did totally support the USDA child nutrition waiver for free school meals again for this year, which is really nice that they have recognized that there is the need. I mean, we've had such high numbers in our food service, so it was nice to hear their support for that.
The kids are taking advantage of it, and, you know, we're less stressed around families, so don't stress us for lunches. And then the health insurance financials, and they look a little scary because we don't collect any premiums in July and August. But if you look at the scroll on down, we'll look at the signed report, and where we sort of accrue, keep going, Kelly, what we would have received in July and August, where our shortfall is, one more page, right, at the bottom of this. The shortfall is,
That was the county report.
So July, we were down 52,000. In August, we actually show a positive. Of 126,000. I'm not totally sure what I'm looking at there. But in July and August, we don't collect premiums, so the cash position looks terrible. But, you know, we're new into the year, we'll see how it progresses. Increased premiums, again, so we'll just keep an eye on it. No, that's the end of it, so. So we look at these monthly at finance, and again, we can, email or at the board meeting. Specific question.
Any questions? Okay, thank you, Gwen. Next on the agenda is the human resource and personnel, so the personnel action items. Tracy?
Monthly activity on, personnel as it relates to information. Questions on this?
I'd just like to make a motion that action items that.
Thank you, Scott.
I would like to second that.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Any questions from the board?
Yeah, what's gonna happen to the Glacier Track program with all those retirements?
Jack, do you want a position?
I was gonna say, you're gonna step in to go, Jack's up.
No.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, no further questions. All in favor of the personnel action items, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Rebecca?
Aye.
Been approved unanimously. Thank you, Tracy. Next on the agenda, contracts and change orders. Micah?
Yeah, so the first, contract that you're gonna see is for a construction manager at risk. Our district has been working with, architects and engineers to develop plans and sites, for our transportation and maintenance facility. In that process, we got some initial cost estimates and were advised and agreed that we should approach this from a construction manager at risk perspective. And so we put out an RFQ for proposals from local contractors, and we reviewed two of them, one from Martell and one from Swank. And then we interviewed both contractors, and it was the decision of that committee to recommend that Martell be under contract for construction manager at risk. So what we're asking the board tonight is to approve that. And anybody on the committee is open to answering any questions you may have.
Any questions?
So, since I was on the, process to go through.
Thank you, Scott.
I would love to.
Thank you, Diane. And no further questions, so all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Rebecca, how do you vote?
Aye.
Rebecca? Thank you. It has been approved unanimously. Next up,
To replace 4 speakers at and just these items, and get your approval of this agreement with Pro.
Can I ask a question? Is there a return policy on that?
No, there isn't, because it's specialized equipment, and when they ordered it, yes, they, no return, no.
Any other questions?
I'll move to approve the acceptance of the contract with Pro Audio for the Legends Stadium speakers, and to thank Gwen with all my emails I sent her about it.
Thanks, Kim. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Heather. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Rebecca, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you. It has been approved unanimously. Next one.
I can talk about this one. Rocky Mountain Supervac has been a company that we've worked with for many years to help with our snow removal and ice abatement. And Greg has been working over the last year to try and bring some of that back into the district's hands as opposed to subbing it out for all of our facilities. And so there are just, when you look at the sheer size of some of our parking areas and the amount of time it would take the crew with limited machinery to clear those areas and make them safe for vehicles and for traffic, foot traffic that's walking across parking lots, we still needed to sub out some of these snow removal areas, in particular Glacier High School and AMS. And so we pulled some of that back in. Our own people will be doing that. We bought some equipment. We bought snow melt, different things like that. But this one is just to continue to have those services available to us. And he did seek, multiple quotes on this, and, Rocky Mountain Supervac was the.
And we did vet this extensively at the finance committee. So it was nice to hear all the details. Any questions?
Is that an à la carte, like they charge per work, or is it a monthly thing?
It's à la carte. So, we have certain conditions where, at certain snow levels, like if there was an inch of snow, they might just do, ice melt. And if there was, more than 2 inches, they would come in and plow.
Per hour, and that's kind of what we're going to, what we're agreeing to is their rate. Them as needed.
Move that we approve.
Thank you, Mark. Is there a second?
Okay.
Jack, thank you.
I do have one quick question too.
Yeah.
Do we actually have to call them?
You know, and I have a question too. The state of Montana is that needs snow removal as well. So by signing a contract, this is set in stone. We have them.
Yeah.
So, okay, good.
Yeah, and usually like at Glacier High School, they leave their equipment on site for the entire winter.
Good. That's here.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Rebecca, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you. It has been approved unanimously. Next on the agenda, the purchase of Lot 4 at the old school station. Micah?
Yes. I'm going to try and be succinct and explain this in terms that even I will understand. Currently, we own Lot 3A. That was a ballot measure and was widely approved by the voters of the high school district to be the lot where we would build our maintenance and transportation facility. After that was approved, we were approached by DCP, who is a developer that owns the FedEx building. And DCP was looking at expanding their operations with FedEx. And we bought the lot that would be directly adjacent to DCP and FedEx. And they bought Lot 4, which is directly to the north. And there's a diagram in here that'll show that. And being good neighbors, we actually explored whether or not Lot 4 would suffice for our district needs. And on this site, you can see, or on this little drawing, you can see where School District 5 owns the lot at the south in the right-hand corner. And just to the left of that is DCP FedEx property. And to the north of that is the lot that DCP owns. And so when we looked at it and we worked with the architects and engineers, they said, you know, we can make this work. They actually said we probably need to do a lot line adjustment to gain about half an acre, 0.57 acres of Lot 3A and make that part of Lot 4. And then they offered a real estate exchange agreement, and I sent it to Montana School Boards Association to say, hey, are we covering our bases here? And they sent back a nice 4-page document that said, here are all the laws, and literally what we have to do in order to be able to make that Lot 4 a part of School District 5 is we have to purchase it from DCP first. And then, once we own both pieces of property, we can do the boundary line adjustment, and then we can declare Lot 3A surplus and sell it through normal means and channels. And, you know, through all of this, working with Bill Phillips and DCP and through our architects and engineers and our steering committee, we felt like this was actually, in our best interest, because one, being in lot 4 gives us 2 means of egress, into and out of that lot. It also, is less to, develop, it's less acreage, and so it has a lot of different benefits for us. So we have to buy this lot, and so what we're asking for tonight is, to allow us to, to allow Sue to sign a buy-sell agreement with DCT for lot 4. And then we'll bring this back again in front of the board with a boundary line adjustment, new lots, and then we'll declare that property surplus. It has to be, noticed and in the paper, and we have to give it 14 days. And then, we can move forward with the, sale of lot 3A to DCT. Did I cover that pretty well, Glenn? Everybody clear as mud?
But the oddity in all this is that piece of property that we now own, we have to declare surplus. That's the oddity in all of it.
Yep.
In order to exchange it for the lot to the north of it. So it is surplus, but it's not surplus. It's a trading chip.
Yep. And so what you're seeing right now on the screen is the final plan design for the configuration of lot 4 with our bus barn building, which would be to the middle left. Yep. And then to the south would be maintenance, print shop, shipping and receiving, cold storage, and you can see where the 2 ingress, egress outlets are, and you can see where the original lot 3A line is and then what the proposed boundary line would be.
So my only thought is, and it doesn't impact the decision that we're gonna make tonight, but it'll impact it when it comes back, is you have the one schematic that shows 0.57 acres, and the prior discussions were always about 1 acre based on that greater line versus the dog leg to the left. Which one are we gonna go with?
We are going with the dog leg to the left.
I would think you'd want the full 1 acre in order to have good place for snow removal and retention ponds on that end of it there. So to me, I don't know that we're saving anything for half an acre, but that's for future discussion.
Julie knows.
I like the egress idea.
Yeah.
Mhm.
In our thought, and just on Jack's comment, that little triangle of land, we could certainly hold on to that and use it for snow removal. What I had asked our engineers to do was to really look at, for the area that we would possibly be moving snow and volume, what would be the amount required. And so that's where they came up with that boundary line adjustment, so that, one, in that exchange, the district is going to come out ahead financially, because it's not going to cost us as much for the land. And then also, whether you're putting snow removal there, you have to have retention ponds and a bunch of other engineering factors considered as we look at that.
It is underway.
Yeah, I prefer the 1 acre versus the half acre, because I think not only that but for some ungodly reason, we need more storage area off, and that gets in there. So, and the extra land is not gonna, or the fewer extra dollars to retain that in the exchange that we had is not significant enough to lose that land, in my mind. I don't have any problem making a motion to approve, provide Sue with authority to pursue the exchange.
Okay.
Language. Motion to approve the buy-sell agreement with DCP to purchase lot 4 of Old School Station, which is 4.73 acres.
Thank you, Jack. Is there a second? Thank you, Kim. Any other discussion?
I just have one thing.
are getting money from the difference in acreage between the two.
Yeah, DCP, in that real estate exchange agreement is going to cover the costs of, survey, boundary line adjustment, closing costs. There is no additional cost to the district, to be able to do this.
One more question is, the expected repayment or expected exchange would be,
Yes, this is on a pretty short timeline, so we're looking, prior to the end of October. If everything happens the way it should.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Everybody in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Rebecca, how do you vote?
Aye.
Okay, it's been approved unanimously. Next on the agenda, kindergarten approval for 4-year-olds. Gwen?
So we had some approvals earlier, numerous. We've had some additional meantime and action to approve additional for account day and next month account day, so. Approved for accounts and to be used for our A and B.
And this is a routine thing we have to do every
The
fall.
board has to approve attendance of students 5, or they can't be kept.
Any other questions? Want to make a motion?
I will move to approve the, list of kids under the age of 5 in the kindergarten classes.
Thank you, Diane. Is there a second? Thank you, Kim. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say, it's elementary only. So all elementary trustees in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Rebecca?
Aye.
Thank you. It has been approved unanimously by the elementary trustees. Thank you. Let's move on to surplus property.
That's what we were just talking about, anytime the district no longer has use for property, we go through the surplus process. Those are the items that are being surplus this evening. We'll advertise that for 14 days, and some of those items will be sold, some will be, maybe there's nothing. This is a process.
Questions?
I move as presented.
Thank you, Mark. Is there a second? Thank you, Scott. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of the surplus property motion as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Rebecca?
Aye.
Thank you. It has been approved unanimously. Next is student status change. Callie?
Thank you. Again, this is a routine matter that I come to in front of you once or twice a year. And basically, we are cleaning up Power School so that the students that are in Power School and active are actually there. If you grant permission this evening to unenroll students that have not been in attendance and we have no idea where they are, the student could walk in tomorrow and want to enroll, and all we would have to do is press the button in Power School and they'd be back in. Their records do not disappear whatsoever. This is basically just cleaning up so we don't have ghosts sitting in Power School.
Thank you, Callie. Any questions?
You all move that we approve the change in status from enrolled.
Thank you, Scott. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Kim. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Rebecca?
Aye.
Thank you. It's been approved unanimously. Strategic planning.
Yeah.
This is information only.
Pull that up, Callie. Just wanted to update the board a little bit on strategic planning. We had started talking about this almost 2 years ago, and something that we had set as kind of a priority. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what strategic planning is and is not. And part of the reason why I'm bringing this back up again, when we first talked about it, we were going to contract with Montana School Boards Association to lead us in this process. And then COVID happened, and Montana School Boards Association said, sorry, you know, we'd love to help, but we're not going to come in person to help facilitate this. And so we put it on hold, and then got re-engaged Montana School Boards Association again, and they said, yep, we want to do this, here's kind of a timeline. And then the Delta variant happened, and they said, sorry, we're not going to do in person. And it's something, I guess, in my mind, and it could just be me, but I felt like having someone who was actually physically here helping to facilitate this, reading body language, interacting with people, interacting specifically with the board was important to me. And we, Sue and I had talked about it and reached out to a couple other people that we know that help facilitate strategic planning processes. One of them said, I would love to do it, but I'm not going to do it while we're in the middle of a pandemic. And then we talked to Darlene Shuttle, who was a former superintendent in Kalispell. She was superintendent here 7 years ago, has quite a resume, the chair of the Board of Public Education, 40 plus years in education, serves on a variety of state and national groups, and really knows Montana, knows Kalispell Public Schools, but has been far enough removed from the district for a while that we feel like she could do a great job. And so next board meeting, we'll be bringing a contract in front of you. It's very similar cost-wise to what we were going to do with Montana School Boards Association. And she's actually going to be in Kalispell October 28th, and would like to come and talk to the board and start to kind of develop what this plan is going to look like. But before we get to there, I wanted to talk to the board just a little bit about what it is and what it isn't. You can go to the next slide, Callie. And there's a lot of words in here, but strategic planning leads to the strategic plan. And this is something that tells me, it tells our administrative staff, it tells our teachers, it tells our community, it tells our students what we hope to gain or what we hope to do and be into the future. And when you look at that, you know, there is an evaluation of your mission, beliefs, vision. We don't spend a lot of time there because we already have that in place, but there may be some tweaks that need to be looked at. And then, you know, kind of what are the values of the district? What do we expect of our staff? What do you expect of our students? What do you expect of our community and how we support this strategic plan? And it's something that, depending on who you talk to, they might say a strategic plan is for 3 years, or someone might say you need to really look further down the road than that. What do you think? What could you envision for the future 10 years from now? And it's just it's a process. And you can go to the next slide, Callie. So strategic planning is really just a series of meetings. You start by gathering data and facts. So Darlene's going to gather all of our assessment data and our attendance data and a variety of different things about our district. Look at our policies, look at some of the legislation that recently changed. And we're going to pull all of that in together, and then we're going to start having conversations about assumptions for the future. What are we assuming about the future? And it's hard to predict right now. I mean, I wouldn't have predicted we'd be where we are today, technology-wise, instructionally, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so it's kind of a hopeful process to talk about those things. And then once we've gathered all of that together, that really is what helps us to articulate what our goals are, right? So if our goal is that we need to, I'm just going to use an example, we need to look and develop a way to promote school that encourages career pathways. And so we might say that's our goal, and then how are we going to get there? And so we start to look at, and you can go to the next slide, Callie, who's responsible? Can it be done? How long will it take? And so those are things that we can bring to the board at virtually every meeting when we talk about, hey, we want to hire this position. This is what it supports, and this is how we're going to get there. This is a curriculum that we're going to purchase. This is all part of those, part of that piece that helps us to do that. And then you can go to the next slide. I think probably the biggest thing when you talk about what it is, it's about improving student outcomes and student learning and engagement and all of those pieces. Because sometimes when we talk about strategic planning, we confuse some other terminology and things that we discuss when it comes to school districts. And one of those things is long-range facility planning. A strategic plan will have some components of facility because we recognize that, you know, good school facilities that promote learning and promote engagement and promote some of those things are important. But that is not what this is about. This is about learner outcomes. And so it's not about, and you can go to the next slide, Kelly, because I'm already talking about it, but it's not about a budget. And it's not creating a 300-page document that sits on a shelf that no one uses. This is a very simple, very straightforward, concise, this is what we're about, and this is what our goals are, and this is how we're going to do it, and this is how we're going to measure that. So I just wanted to give the board an understanding of what that process looks like, because there's other processes like long-range facility planning where we start talking about should we be shovel-ready and, you know, doing some things. Should we consider a middle school, another high school, an elementary school? Those are all parts of the bigger piece, but at the forefront of everything that we do and we're about, it's about improving student outcomes. So I just wanted to make sure that the board understood that. And then ask me questions.
You know, and I just want to add that an important part of this is involving all the stakeholders. It's not just the people sitting in this room right now. It's talking to parents. It's talking to community members. It's talking to students. And, you know, this is something that Darlene has done before as part of strategic planning for people, as well as, you know, when she sat here. So I'm pretty excited about this stuff, and I think it's someplace we need to go, but we have to be very careful that we stay focused on the purpose of strategic planning, that we don't get down in the weeds with a lot of things, which is easy to do.
I can do it all the time.
So I have a question. So you said Darlene's coming on the 28th of October?
I think that's the date.
Okay, well, at the end of October, with the idea then that we could still do this fall, start this, or in the spring, or?
We would start it this fall. She put together a tentative timeline.
She has time.
Yes.
And this would, great.
And she's not even charging us to come in October, because she's already going to be in town. She just wants to have a conversation with the board.
Well, amazing. Love the connection.
Yeah. It was pretty fortuitous, I think. Any other questions on that?
This is Rebecca Linden. I have one. Oops, or if there's somebody there first, that's fine too.
No, go ahead, Rebecca.
So I'm absolutely with Micah on the having somebody do this in person is very critical. However, we spent a lot of time choosing MTSBA and reviewing other people who did this and thinking through what we really wanted. And as I recall, MTSBA was actually one of the more expensive ones, but we decided to go with it for, reasons that we had thought through at the time. So I wonder if we should just wait. I mean, if, it's been a number of years that we've been operating without a strategic plan. Although I'm excited about doing one, I want to make sure we're doing it right. So I wonder if we should wait till this group that we had, thought was the perfect group is ready to do it with us.
I can address a little bit of that, Rebecca. MTSBA is actually one of the cheapest options out there. They were around $3,000 plus travel and per diem and things like that. They were actually relatively inexpensive for the completed project. Other groups can charge upwards of $20,000 to $30,000 to facilitate this. So I think and what I would say is, I mean, I could facilitate it, but I also felt like bringing someone in who is outside, neutral. I don't have all the best ideas, and I want someone that people can speak freely to. And I think whether it's MTSBA or Dr. Schottel or another person or another entity, that part I can live with anybody. What I see is as we move through this year and coming out of last year, I see this as being an important piece to our district continuing to move forward and continuing to be a leader in education and setting the example for the state. Those are just my thoughts.
I would say that the process is probably the most important part of the strategic education we're all going to get as board. I think sooner rather than later. Strategic planning has waited long enough. Why not do it now? Darlene would be the opportunity for us for one thing, and it seems like MTSB has been a little flaky on this. We have an answer here. I think it's great. Tomorrow.
Do we have any idea on the timeline of when MTSBA might be comfortable doing in person again, or is it just, wait and see what the Delta variant does?
It's pretty much a wait and see. I mean, for a short window of time, they were doing workshops in person, and that's when we started talking to them again, and now they have pulled back and are just going remote. And I agree that I think this is something we need to get started right now. We have waited long enough. We just heard, from Dr. Poland that, you have to move forward. And this is our opportunity to move forward. We have been stuck in the COVID merry-go-round for a long time. I want to do something positive.
I think she's a great person for us to bring in because she knows education, she knows the district, she knows our county. All in favor for it.
Micah, when do you think we'll have a contract? I know you said we'll bring it forward at the next meeting.
Yep, at the next board meeting.
Okay.
Yep, and in that contract, she kind of spelled out a timeline, and Jack and Sue and I actually reviewed it and felt like it was a little fast to start out of the blocks, but it's completely revisable, and the board can have all the input that they want on how we can make that happen. And so it can be, something that is done by February, but we could also say, hey, we're going to take our time with this, and we could make it as late as May or June. But one of the things in that timeline we talked a little bit about is you could certainly extend it out, but if you're asking community stakeholders and parents and people to be a part of the process, If it feels really long and drawn out, they might not be, as engaged. So having a shorter time frame with some very specific dates and times, would be helpful.
And the process that Darlene shared with us is very similar to the MTSBA process. So wait to read that contract next meeting. Okay, safe return to schools and continuity of service plan. Micah.
All right, I'm doing a lot of talking. Wanted to share with the board our updated numbers. This was as of this morning at 7 a.m. What you're seeing at the very top of this is for all of Kalispell Public Schools, you see our current student enrollment was 6,211, 793 staff, and then you have the active cases. So currently we have 14 active cases of COVID. I did check it out this afternoon, and it was, I think it was at 17. But those are our student cases, and then you also see the cumulative cases, which I think I can't read that number, 68. And then you also see staff. We've had 22 staff so far this year. We have 8 active. And you see the percentages as they relate to those overall enrollments. And then as you go down through the list, one thing we did differently this year, if this scrolls back up just a little bit, Callie, identified what I call districts. So bus drivers, maintenance, engineers, central office employees, central kitchen employees, people who aren't necessarily tied to a school, included those numbers as well. That was something that we didn't do last year. And then you can see where those case counts are at each of the individual schools. Kalispell Middle School, definitely one of the harder hit with active COVID cases with kids. They've had 21 year to date. We're also seeing a little bit more at Rankin and Edgerton. So those are kind of our hot spots. I will say that anecdotally, I think our cases are underreported. We know that we have parents who are just calling and letting us know that their child is sick with COVID-like symptoms. We're just going to keep them home and not necessarily get them tested. We also have parents who are using home tests from Walgreens or Walmart and telling us, yep, my child tested positive. We're going to keep them home, but if that test doesn't go through a lab confirmed test like the county or Logan Health or what we're proposing that we're going to do, it doesn't get counted in the overall case counts for the county, and we can't count them as a school. So there's some discrepancy in that. I don't want the board to think that, it's all just roses and sunshine out there. There are a lot of kids absent, and what we're seeing also on the next chart is the quarantines. So far, year to date, we've had 95 quarantines. I think Peterson Elementary right now has 19 students in quarantine. So we're seeing some of those things happen, especially if you get 1 or 2 positive cases in one classroom. You're more or less quarantining a whole classroom with that. So those are our current numbers. I updated them for the board because it was Tuesday night, but those all get updated Wednesday night and then are posted to our website on Thursday morning. Questions about case counts or how we're tracking this? Heather?
Micah, my question is, so I'm looking at Peterson Elementary here with 19 active quarantines. Are we checking in with these kids in quarantine to see, out of those kids, have they all been tested? Are any of them positive, or we're just holding them in quarantine?
We're holding them in quarantine, but we're also recommending if they become symptomatic that they get tested. Okay. And knowing that they can come back from a quarantine after getting tested on day 5, and with a negative test result and asymptomatic, they can return on day 8. So shortening up some of those quarantines for sure. I think some of the other challenges we're seeing is, and Matt can probably speak more to this than I can, but we're having kids who are getting tested or having to wait to get tested. So maybe they're sick for a couple of days, they go to the doctor to get tested or try to make an appointment to get tested. It's gonna be 2 days before we can even get you in. And then you get the test result positive, and by the time you start with symptom onset to when they get their result back, their isolation period might almost be over. And so then you have a student who, you know, we find out on day 8, and now you've got a group of kids that you're close contact tracing and trying to determine if you're going to, you know, have them quarantine for a day or 2 days from their last exposure to that student. So it's been I would say it's been far more complicated this year than last year with everything. Matt, would you agree?
Yeah. The quarantine numbers are definitely down in comparison to what we're actually seeing at schools. The majority of the kids that are getting quarantined by the county are cases where there's been multiple exposures in a classroom. We're seeing more of that. So one kid gets sick, and because of that delay in testing, by the time we get a positive test back, we got a couple other kids just out sick. So we saw somebody's trying to, there's not ill intent, it's just delaying the testing, and so they go back, other kids are sick, and then we find out that those kids test positive, but we're chasing information that's like 7 days old. So the county's been good in working with us as best they can, but there's just a lot of active cases in the Flathead Valley now. I think, Mike, the SIT report from the last 2 days was.
Yeah, we had 143 new cases in the county yesterday and 128 today. And then I'm just looking at an email. So last week, we had 854 cases per 100,000 for the week ending September 18th. For the week ending September 25th, we had 666. And that positivity rate is hovering right around 20%. At the peak in November of last year, our positivity rate was around 25%. And so we're really hitting up on that. But what's interesting when you look at the graph in November of last year, it was a pretty sharp spike graphically. And what we're seeing right now is 20% over several weeks in a row. So it's definitely here, but we're managing. You know, probably again, our biggest issue is staffing. You know, just short on substitutes, lots of activities going on. And so we've been really struggling to maintain staffing. Our teachers are doing a lot of comp time, covering for each other, doubling up classes. Again, just taking on the lion's share of trying to keep our schools open. We have had some grade levels or teams that have been pretty impacted by absenteeism. I think the middle school, they were pushing 20% of at least one grade level team. So we keep an eye on all of that and pushing forward. Any questions about the data side of things? Okay. Next, I want to just give a brief update on just the whole safe return to schools and continuity of service plan. We are, it feels like everything has been about at 90% completion to get some things moving forward, and we continue to make headway on providing testing sites for our district as well as 8 other districts. We're basically into a cooperative with 9 total districts. Our plans are to have 3 testing sites, one at the county fairgrounds and one kind of to the east. Snappy Sports Center has said that they would let us set up shop, so to speak, on their site, and then we're working on a site kind of to the north and west of town as well. The idea being that we would be able to provide rapid testing and or PCR testing for all students and staff of those 9 districts, and making it more readily available. So whether it's return to work and school and getting a result immediately, or if we have, students who are symptomatic but are unable to get somewhere to get tested. So we're just trying to eliminate any barriers that might exist, where our hours of operation are going to be more in the morning and again after school. So trying to coincide with times that would work for parents who are working and maybe struggling to be able to get access to, say, the Logan Health testing site that's only open from 8 to 5. So, and then also again on the weekend. So we put together what I feel is a pretty solid plan. We submitted our information to the Montana Department of Health and Human Services, and I'm really letting Matt take the lead on the idea. And so he's bringing it all to fruition as we speak. And so we're hoping that we will be up and running October 11th. We've got all the testing supplies, we've got all the PPE. There's a few things that we have to have, and in order to make it work, one of those is staffing for those sites. And so we've got, I think everything's pretty good to go. Anything to add, Matt?
No, lots of details, and this was a really great idea that Micah had, and I know I said it at the last board meeting, but it's been really well received by the other area superintendents. We're all struggling with access to rapid tests. That's the constant feedback we're getting back from parents, is they're saying, kids wake up in the morning, they're sick, and they don't know where to take them in, there's nowhere to get a rapid test, they don't want to keep them home for 2 days to wait on the test results, so they're just sending them to school. And then on the other end of the schedule, if they pick them up from school, it's not feeling well, it'd be nice to have someplace just to get them tested. So it's whole Flathead Valley starting with this, and Mike really loved starting this idea, and we all collaborated on the grant, got it forward, so your 90 schools from the Flathead Valley are sending in grants, and we're just excited to get it back and get going and get quicker test results, and then get kids back to school sooner on the quarantine. We're seeing kids that don't have access to tests, so they have to be out the entire 10 days. That's our goal.
Yep. And then the last thing that I would share is that the safe return to schools and continuity of services plan, which is linked on the agenda, it's being updated. So every time we have a board meeting and we talk about it, it's always a standing agenda item, but any kind of changes. So like when we approved policy 1910, that's now in that running record. So we'll continue to have just a running record of everything that we're doing as it relates to schools, so that we are in compliance with our ESSER, whatever requirements we have to be responsible for.
I have one question. The staffing needs, is that medical staff?
No. No. So in order to administer tests and be considered a lab, we had to apply for a waiver under the Department of Health and Human Services, and it's called a CLIA waiver. I can't even tell you what that stands for anymore. And then to be trained, you have to watch basically a 6-minute video. We're actually partnering with Logan Health and County Health Department, and they will train and show us how to collect a nose swab, stick it in a little packet, drop droplets on it. And so we're in good shape there. But yeah, it does not have to be a nurse or anything like that.
Any other questions from the board? I think we have public comment on this agenda item. Devin, I just want to remind you that it's comment, not questions. But, so, yeah, a comment.
Ask the board question at the appropriate time.
Anything with the administrator.
Yeah.
Public comment section.
I think you can do it now, and if there's any specific question, you can always, ask one of the admins directly.
Devin Decker, out of Kalispell. Just wanted to come back and ask, has anybody else seen that website I was talking about? That air purifier system? No? Okay. Really encourage you guys to look at it. And it's worth a look. I think it's something that I'll find common ground on. Numbers down, and we just talked about close contact. Great solution. And like I talked to Sue earlier, I said, you know, it is expensive, you know, it's a machine. But if we got this COVID funds from the federal government, why don't we use it? I think minutes too, so. All the research, all the FDA research, very reliable machine, and at what number I threw out a couple meetings. Place them throughout the schools, that many. That's a radius of what, 7 square feet, 5,000 square feet. Air and all that. Setting, don't need to buy a lot of machines. Classroom, lunchroom, always. Anyway, I just want to throw that out there, and I'll probably do that pretty much every time. I think.
Thank you.
Another thing. Thanks.
Okay, consent agenda, elementary only. Who's, anybody talking about these?
Consent agenda.
Thank you.
Elementary.
Diane, thank you, Kim. Been moved and seconded. All elementary trustees in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Rebecca?
Aye.
Thank you. It has been approved unanimously. Tuition, oh, no. Okay, never mind. Consent agenda district-wide fundraisers, fruit sale, and the holiday wreath sale. Any questions?
The district wide.
Thank you, Scott. Is there a second?
I second what you just.
Thank you, Mark. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, and this is district-wide, so all trustees in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Rebecca?
Aye.
Thank you. I just have a couple of things I want to mention, before we wind things up. If you notice the upcoming meetings, please pay attention that there is a change in one of the times for the curriculum committee meeting. And it has been brought to my attention that the IT committee and the SPED committee meet at the same time.
Yeah.
And, which means you can't go to both of them. So, is anybody opposed to us trying to figure out different times for those two committees? Or at least for one of them? SPED committee meets
I'm
Four
not
to
opposed.
You're not, you're opposed?
I'm not opposed.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think that's an easy fix, I think we can, do that. Does everybody know which committees they're on? Cool. Anything else?
Not for me.
Anything else from board members?
Do we have to do?
There is nobody left here.
I would like to say, I really appreciate, the presentation tonight, and I really appreciate the effort that's been made, under the circumstances we've been up against, and, we have to move on. But we're gonna learn a lot, and the only way to learn is to be uncomfortable.
Yep. Thank you for saying that, Mark. Anything else? Anybody want to make a motion to adjourn? Oh, Lynn, you want to make a motion?
We don't joke around here. I move we adjourn.
I second that.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Rebecca,
Aye.
meeting adjourned.